Hopefully you're all full and ready to engage in some of the work that we talked about, that Heidi spoke to you about, that we wanted to see if we can encompass as a presbytery. To delve into and spend some time talking about why we do what we do and how we do it. Why do we do what we do as a presbytery? My parents ask me that question a lot. Besides the question of when are you actually going to be a pastor? But if we look at our mission statement as a presbytery, and it's printed out there for you because I know all of you did not memorize it, as I didn't. We stated that our goals are to strengthen witness and mission of congregations. That's a very important part of being Presbyterian. We have also committed to build strong partnerships in communities in order so that we together can participate in God's transformative work through the gospel. As we've done this over the years, there's some things that bubble up that we as your staff have noticed in our work, things that we have noticed in readings that we do, in conversations with colleagues around the country, in conferences that we attend. And we thought we would really like to identify these three areas that we feel are really central to what it means to be Presbyterian and to be doing the healthy kind of work of supporting and nurturing our congregations to faithful discipleship and witness to the gospel. These three we've teased out separately, but they really are interrelated. You really can't have one without the other. We're going to talk a little bit as an overview tonight about those three. Our hope is that we're going to start building on these three components because these are really what we have identified as our focus areas for being Presbyterian together. So the first one that I want to talk to you about is leadership development. What is leadership development? It just so happens that, as some of you know, I serve on the committee of the Office of General Assembly, and we are wrestling with some of these questions on the national level. As a matter of fact, we recently conducted a nationwide survey on minister members, so teaching elders across the country, and we discovered that 83% of all the presbyteries in the U.S. have one or less minister members under the age of 35. Think about that. I'll say that. About 83% of our presbyteries, there's 172 presbyteries, so 83% of them have one or less minister members 35 or under. Oh. Said the retired minister. Now, that's not to say that there are not ministers under the age of 35 looking for calls, but they're not going into all the presbyteries. Okay, so we have this imbalance of leadership in certain presbyteries. The other thing that we found out as COVID that I thought was really interesting is at the last General Assembly, one of the most vocal and vociferous movements was that the young advisory delegates no longer are content with having a voice at General Assembly. They are demanding voice and vote. And the argument is, or the conversation has been around, if you are asking us to do the same work as the other commissioners and to be fully invested in the work of the General Assembly, why are we just advising you and not actually having an effect on the outcome of the major elections? These are important, I think, for us as a presbytery to recognize and realize when we look at our leadership. Now, we have the benefit that there are some minister members under the age of 35 in this presbytery. There's one. But I'd like us to consider for a moment, what do our sessions look like when they get together and what the average age is of your ruling elders. And I'm not talking about youth elders who are asked to give some input as they learn how to be an elder, but a full-fledged member as an elder. One of the things that we're looking at also in a lot of our meetings also, what kind of leadership is necessary for effective pastoral leadership? It used to be that we wanted a strong preacher, a strong theologian. What we're finding out is that we actually are looking less for specialists and more for generalists. Pastors need to be more generalists. And we are really blessed in this presbytery to have many pastors who have recognized this and embraced it. So what does a generalist mean? A generalist pastor is the one who guides and accompanies their people into transformative experiences in their day-to-day life. So it's not just about what happens Sunday morning, but it's every single day in just regular Joe Schmo kind of living. How do you encounter the sacred and transformative experiences in those moments? It's a pastor who mobilizes and inspires the congregation to see themselves not as a separate entity in their community, but actually as a part of the wider community. That without the wider community, they would not exist. That they are because they all are together. A generalist pastor is agile and attempts changes. They ask hard questions without taking it personally when the answers are not favorable to them. It's a pastor who's not afraid of failure because it just means that's one less way they need to try it out the next time. A generalist pastor is also able to identify other leaders, especially leaders who historically and traditionally have not been tapped into because of their age, their gender, their race, ethnicity, ability, and so on and so on. The ability to identify those leaders, not just inside of their four walls of the church, but in the entire community. And to partner with those leaders, and to learn from those leaders. To be able to say, our church needs to learn from you on how to be effective leaders in our community. The pastor also, when they're a generalist, understands that conflict is part of being human, and they're not afraid of it. And actually, many times conflict, healthy conflict, can actually lead to creativity. Finally, I think what I've discovered is that the most transformative pastor or pastoral leaders are the ones who are not afraid to ask questions. And also to ask the question, what am I not asking about? What am I afraid to ask about? So as we move through the other two areas, I want you to keep in mind, in the back of your mind there, some questions to think about for yourself. When you think about being a leader in your congregation, what are questions that your leadership avoids asking? What are those places where you just don't want to touch that? Also, consider what are some leadership qualities that you have found to be effective in your experience. Which ones have led to actual transformation? We talk a lot about transformation in the church, and yet we're so afraid of it. And one of the problems with being afraid of transformation is that we have fallen back on the alternative, which is transactional ministry. You come, we give you this, you go away happy. What if we take that off the table? What if we as leaders begin to think that the one and only option that we have in embodying the gospel is to provide a transformative experience through relationships, through engagement, and through our leadership?
One of the things I'd like to build on is this idea of transformation and in the context of congregational transformation or change. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the old interim ministry training that the denomination used to and still does sponsor, but it's changed over the years, and now it's called transitional ministry. One of the things that you're kind of involved in by extension is allowing myself and Eliana and Heidi to go down to Manuka a couple times a year to basically take up the topic that Eliana just took up with pastors in settings where they know the status quo is no longer viable. And that really leads us into congregational development. If there's one thing that we know as a mainline church, it's maintenance mode. It is status quo. Right? All right. Amen for status quo. Yes. Back. Yeah. And unlike many of our non-denominational siblings, we've been organizing churches and establishing churches nationally for centuries. And here on the West Coast or the left coast for about 100 years or more. And let's be honest, the establishment of Presbyterian churches often meant the displacement of local communities and people. And we need to acknowledge that and make that right. And we need to find ways of getting out of maintenance mode and to get into congregational redevelopment mode or transformation. To state it differently, we need to focus our energies more and more to the good work that you are doing as leaders in this presbytery to renew and revitalize existing congregations. So in this area of congregational development, there are two major things that we do. We do new church development or new worshiping communities, and we do redevelopment and revitalization, transformational work among established congregations. And we're all actively involved in this work. You may not know it, but in the last 10 years, amidst all the talk of mainline decline, we've started 9 new worshiping communities, and we've chartered 3 new congregations. Right? Wow. And this is the good work that we are doing together as a presbytery, and you all are doing as leaders. This kind of work is multicultural. It involves a lot of listening and leadership support, some theological training, some polity work, and sometimes a little bit of admin help, in the back office. For established congregations, though, this work looks slightly different because we're dealing with long-established patterns and expectations of how we do things. When we do things. Why we do things. So doing something new or something different isn't always a welcome idea, right? We don't know quite where to go. And we as congregation members maintain buildings. And we inhabit spaces that have subtle and not so subtle expectations and reminders of how to faithfully use this space. Again, we're intuitively told what's allowable and what's permissible to do according to the architecture, the arrangement of the room, and the way in which we inhabit these spaces and we live and move and have our being as congregation members and leaders. Yet to transform ourselves anew, to live differently, to orient ourselves to our communities and their needs in new ways, if that's what God's calling us to do, and I think that is true for all of us, we have to find ways to move out of maintenance mode and enter into a process of openness so that God might do something new within us. And to enter into this process that may upset the very balance of these structures that hold us together. To go and to explore congregational development, to go all in, on transformation, we have to be willing to move away from the comfort of maintenance mode and be willing into a process of uncertainty and surprise and hope for the sake of the future. As an example, when one of our sessions decides it can no longer do its mission in its own building, that it's hindered and hobbled and hemmed in by its facilities, and the dreams of the past, and it decides to put everything on the line and allow everything to be up for grabs, and to give itself up to God, and to spend a season asking God what they should do, who they should serve, where they should go, and then God answers, well, then I think you have a process of transformation. And that transformation then empowers them to ground themselves into a new mission to the seniors in their community and to those who serve them in new ways that they couldn't before. It allows them to have the courage to sell their building, that place of old dreams and old expectations, and to relocate and share their space with their Lutheran siblings in Federal Way. Thank you, Steele, for that example. Or when a pastor decides it's time to say the hard thing, to name that without major changes, our future looks quite uncertain. Or as Susie reminded me, our future actually looks very certain, and we know where it's going. And then faithfully leads the session and the congregation to take a deep look into who they are, so that they can now start to ask questions of who God might be calling them to be now, today. And then they restaff for a different future with the goal of deeper engagement with their community. That's the transformative work that we need to engage in and continue to engage in as a presbytery with East Summit Avenue for that example. These are just two examples of many among our presbytery. And this is the kind of work that we want to name as the work we want to continue to encourage within our presbytery and to get behind. So as you'll read more in the motion from the executive board, the transformational grants are a step in that direction. But we want to hear from you what's happening in your congregations, what kind of questions you're asking, what kinds of things you're wondering about, what kinds of things are holding you back, what kind of questions need to be asked, what kinds of things need to be named in order for you to enter into some congregational development or transformative work as Presbyterian.
And then Delaware. The opportunity to observe what God is doing in the presbytery has provided the ability to locate, to use the term Scott used, to name, to identify what the Holy Spirit is up to. And what we begin to locate, to name, to identify, is the way in which churches have historically faced the cross, are now also asking, how do we face the world? And how do we do that as a part of who we are, not as an extra thing, but as the thing? That what facing the cross tells us to do is to face the world and to be with the world, to figure out how to come alongside a neighbor, how to be with folks in community. Not for the sake of filling up the pews, but for the sake of being present in a world that needs salt and light. And so we ask and have watched several leaders in the presbytery ask hard questions about how facing the world transforms how we do church. We have watched pastors and sessions ask themselves how preaching changes when you're in community. Instead of talking about Jesus as my therapist, we begin to talk about how Jesus is down the street in the apartment building where people can be put out of their homes in under 7 days. Yep. And we mobilize the congregation to call our representatives and do something that few cities in Washington State have done. Thank you, Lake Erie, for showing the community how to love itself, to show the community how to be with community. But also what's interesting is what we're learning about community development is that the church is learning something about community. I often reflect upon this, wondering if the disciples actually did learn something when Jesus starts hanging out with Samaritans. Did they learn something about community then that they didn't know before? I think so. Because they would soon have to be community beyond the boundaries of what it meant to be Jew. And so what we're learning is that community development is not an extra thing the church is doing. It is the thing churches are doing. And this has implications that impact not just how we preach, but the structure of the building itself. For example, historically, mainline denominations over the last even 100 years have had two really different iterations of how their buildings were structured. First, it was the development of the Sunday school. And Sunday school classes became a part of the structure of the church, actually rooms, right, developed within the buildings of the church. And when we go from church to church in the presbytery, you can see when the building was designed, how it was designed to do Sunday school. And then there was this opportunity as the city opened up daycares and first grade and kindergarten became a part of what the church could do. So churches were shaped and formed around Christian education and then community education. But now we're seeing churches ask a different question. How do we become a part of community engagement and community development? How do we structure our buildings and our way of life around community development? Which is an interesting question to buildings that were built in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. And churches realizing that Jesus just doesn't show up on Sunday morning, but their job is to figure out how to empower their people to find Jesus Monday through Saturday. In transforming not just things like, well, can I be real for a second? Yes. Not just asking how can we help poor people in our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. People we have more power than. People who have less than us. But how can we change the policies and structures of our society that question us when we say, not in my backyard? But yet, we claim a Jesus who said, yes, in my backyard. Yes, yes. This is what we mean and what we're seeing by community development that's really pushing a pastor to figure out how to have meetings with the representatives in their city. It's pushing churches to add a position almost like a community pastor because they see the power of pastoring not just those who come on Sunday, but pastoring the neighborhood, pastoring the community, walking through Enumclaw with Pastor Mel, meeting people and talking to people about what God can do, but also what are they doing that we can be with them in. Why? Just maybe Jesus' ministry wasn't limited to Sunday morning and charitable programs. And maybe our own transformation as a people, as a body, comes when we begin to do the hard work of engaging the community around us on their terms. And just maybe the miracles, all those ones that didn't happen in the temple, maybe they'll come through our hands. Just maybe we'll be graced that they'll come through our congregants, our people. The miracle of watching one of our members at Lake P, who was one of those ones who was going to be put out, to begin to lead the movement in her own neighborhood. Wow.
Yeah.
I'll pass the offering right now. What we'd like to do is invite you now to have some conversation with people around you. And that's why we were hoping you would not sit with people from your own church, because you may have thought you've had these conversations with people from your church. Maybe you've asked these questions and you haven't gone anywhere beyond. We're hoping that you'll be able to have these conversations with people from other churches and hear what else is going on. So we have, next one, there we go. This is the question that we would like you to address, but also some of those that you've heard us tease out. As you heard, and I hope you also discovered this for yourself, these three areas, pastoral leaders, congregation, and community, they are so interrelated. We really can't pull one of them out without affecting the other two. Keep that in mind as you answer these questions in your groups. We've also provided you with some note cards. If there are additional questions or comments that you would like to share with us, we would welcome that. Our hope is to, like I said earlier, to take these topics and begin to expand them and go deeper throughout this year in our Presbyterian meeting, and invite you to really help us direct how the conversation is going. So let's go ahead and break into small groups. We're going to give you 20 minutes for this conversation, and then we'll reflect back and hear what some of you have come up with. Thanks.
Are you ready to share what you're talking about? Have you written it down? And I think in soccer they say you got the yellow card. Is that right? The yellow card. That's a warning. That's right. The yellow card is a warning. I don't want to blame the yellow card. So, who will be first to come up and share? Not come up. Don't come up. From your seat. You want to roll? Okay. We're going to use your roving microphone. And just share what's in your groups. You don't have to have a bunch of answers, as I always like to say. You may have more questions. So, what are you sharing from your groups? Go ahead.
Okay. So within our group, we have multiple immigrant churches. And one of the things that looking at leadership development, all these things are not necessarily the processes within Presbyterian are not culturally sensitive as it could be, but processes and how we do things were not necessarily developed with these in mind. When you have immigrants who are here who are working 2 jobs, maybe sometimes 3 jobs, how are you going to develop them? How are they going to be part of meeting after meeting? How is the program that's been built around some of the different facility classes? And also immigrants coming from non-Christian backgrounds, so they're all new Christians. So how are you going to get them to eldership? How are you going to get them to deacon when they're just learning the very, very basics and learning those definitions? So what can the Presbyterian do and change for leadership development to help these different cultural, which is growing, continually growing, and will continue to grow.
Awesome.
Good question.
Thank you. Good question.
Good question.
I'm taking notes, by the way.
Stacey Guys was in Park Presbyterian. I was sharing that our session shared with our congregation 3 weeks ago that we're proposing a new staffing model with 2 half-time pastors, me as continuing in my role, but then also we will be seeking someone that can help us and can join me in our efforts to reach out to our neighborhood and to reconnect with our neighborhood. And one of the things that we were talking about is for those of our churches that are located in affluent neighborhoods, either gentrified, or in our case, it's always affluent and it's now just more affluent than it ever was. When you're in a justice-driven congregation, there's this well-meaning but condescending, probably, drive to help those who really need it, right? And so when talking about mission, people are less excited about serving those right around us who have a lot of money. And so I was talking about how I think one of the challenges will be to work with our congregation and to find someone who has experience in community organizing, though who wants to work with rich people on how we how we can engage those common values in the neighborhood, how we work in responsible, meaningful solidarity in this very segregated state that we find ourselves in and that we are contributing to. And so how can we not convict our neighbors about that, but join them and say, yeah, we think that we are a part of that.
Mobilize them, yes.
Right. How do we mobilize together?
Amen. Mobilize rich people. Who else? Right hand, sir.
Amy Stanley from AC. I have to admit we were feeling a little bit smug about, because we have partnerships in our building, a hunger intervention program, which this Presbytery is well acquainted with, and a Lifetime Learning Center, and another church that is very powerful, as well as little tiny groups that use our. I was feeling a little smug, and then I thought about something you said, Pally, that the challenge for us, and this also goes with Growing at Grace, but they have an awful lot of other community groups using their church, sort of church as community center. The challenge is to get our members to engage with these partners.
Yes.
And while a few of our members will work with the hunger intervention program, it's just whatever they're doing, whether it's making meals or distributing meals or serving whoever, to not see it as helping the poor folks, like you said, as much as being the presence of Christ coming to pretty much the peers who they're serving with. And likewise, engaging in the Lifetime Learning Center classes to bring Christ to those classes. I think it's a challenge of mindset there, that I'm not just taking the class at the Lifetime Learning Center, but I'm actually bringing the presence of Christ to that, and that is part of my ministry to people. So anyway, thank you for that thought, because I need to work on that. And we were talking about engaging our congregation in what's actually going on in our buildings.
Wow.
We had a really weird one creep up, but it seems simple, but I feel like every church pastor I talk to struggles with it, maybe I'm wrong. But the minute you step into this community development work, even people using your facility, I just feel like administration sucks the life out of the transformation, because suddenly you need contracts and policies and emergency preparedness, and we're all doing that same work in our office, and it feels like there has to be a better way for us to work together on that, so we can duplicate our efforts and make sure that we're being responsible, because it's foundational work, it's not maintenance, you have to do it. But it for us at our church, it sucks the resources from the creativity. right? Because immediately you're into the practical and the dreams stop, and then you're trying to revitalize that. That's one thing. The second thing we talked about is how do you mobilize your entire congregation in transformation work? You have your section, you have your leadership, your region, whatever, but the people who just come on Sunday, or the people who don't live in your neighborhood who still commute to your church, how do you engage the whole church toward the same vision? Is still something that seems like we're all struggling with.
Does that represent you, Maggie?
Well, and we've actually asked that question. This is where the Presbyterian is having that, the staff is having that discussion. How do we systematize the administrative tools for churches that want to do the community engagement work so that we don't have everyone repeating the same thing.
Or you
And taking all this time. So that's one thing I can. Thank you. And that comes from working with SeaPres as well. Are you going to collect the cards now? Is it time?
Well, I'm taking an offering first, but then we'll. Yeah. So yes, the cards in here, and we'll review them and everything we shared, and we'll keep going.
Yeah.
This is so good. This is so good.
Please insert the cards. We really do want to.